The California sun hadn't cleared the horizon when Master Chief Duncan Graves stood at the edge of the shooting range, arms crossed, watching 23 exhausted men stumble through their third day of Hell Week. 3 days without real sleep. 3 days of cold water, soft sand, and instructors screaming in their faces. 3 days that separated the ones who wanted to be SEALs from the ones who would actually become SEALs. Graves had run this program for 8 years. He'd seen college athletes crack like cheap glass. He'd seen former Marines ring the bell after 2 hours. He'd seen men twice the size of normal humans quit because their minds broke before their bodies did. Hell Week wasn't about muscles. It was about something deeper. Something you either had or you didn't. The morning fog rolled in off the Pacific, thick and gray, carrying the salt smell of the ocean and the particular cold that got into your bones and stayed there.
Graves took a sip of coffee, his 4th cup since midnight, and checked his watch. 0530. 30 minutes until the live fire qualification. The one evolution where exhaustion met live ammunition, where shaking hands had to stay steady enough to put rounds on target. That's when he saw her. A woman walking across the grinder, the concrete courtyard where SEAL candidates either became warriors or became statistics. She moved with a kind of economy that caught his attention. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just purpose wrapped in a body that looked like it weighed maybe 120 soaking wet. 5'4", brown hair pulled back tight, civilian tactical pants and a long-sleeve compression shirt despite the building July heat. Face that looked barely old enough to rent a car, let alone whatever she was doing at a classified military training facility at dawn. But it was the eyes that made Graves stand up straighter. They didn't match the rest of her. They were older, harder, the kind of eyes that had seen things most people only read about in sanitized after-action reports. Master Chief Graves? Her voice was calm, controlled. No nervous energy trying to prove she belonged. No eagerness to please. Just a statement of fact, waiting for confirmation. That's me. Graves set his coffee down. And you are? She pulled a folder from her small pack and handed it over. Cassandra Thorne, DoD consultant, Combat Psychology Assessment Program. Graves flipped through the papers, official letterhead, all the right signatures, orders that came from somewhere high enough that he didn't recognize half the office codes. Consultant. He looked up at her. Ma'am, with respect, this is Hell Week. We don't do consultants during Hell Week. Observers, maybe, after the candidates graduate, but not during. I understand the concern, Master Chief. She didn't look away, didn't blink. My orders authorize full integration into training activities at my discretion.
I'm not here to interfere. I'm here to assess combat stress response in real-time conditions. These aren't conditions, ma'am. This is controlled chaos designed to break people. I know what Hell Week is. Something in the way she said it made Graves pause. Not defensive, not argumentative, just a statement of fact from someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. How old are you, Miss Thorne? 28? And how many Hell Weeks have you observed? None. Graves handed the folder back. Then, with respect, you don't know what Hell Week is. You know what the manuals say. You know what the statistics show. But you don't know what it feels like when a man's mind starts lying to him. When his body shuts down, and the only thing keeping him moving is pure will. That's not something you can assess from a distance with a clipboard and a psychology degree. You're right. She tucked the folder away. That's why I'm not assessing from a distance,
Ma'am, I'll participate in the qualification. If I can't perform to your standards, I'll leave. No complaints, no official reports. I'll just disappear and you'll never see me again. Graves studied her, looking for the angle, looking for the trap. DOD sent consultants all the time, desk jockeys who wanted to see what real training looked like so they could write reports about program efficiency and budget optimization. They showed up, watched for a few hours, got uncomfortable when the screaming started, and left before lunch. But something about Cassandra Thorne didn't fit that profile. You understand what you're asking? Graves kept his voice level. These men have been awake for 70 hours. They're running on empty. Live fire qualification isn't a game. One mistake and someone gets hurt, maybe killed. I understand the risk. Do you know how to shoot? Yes. Have you shot under stress before? Something flickered across her face. Not quite emotion, more like the ghost of a memory she didn't want to remember. Yes. Graves looked at his watch. 23 minutes until qualification started. He could send her away. Should send her away. But those orders came from somewhere high enough that refusing might cause problems he didn't need. One magazine, he said finally. 30 rounds. If you can't put 80% on target at 100 meters, you pack your gear and leave. Are we clear? Crystal. Outstanding. Graves picked up his radio. And Miss Thorne? These men have been through hell for 3 days. They're right at the breaking point. The last thing they need is a distraction. I'll try not to distract anyone, Master Chief. She walked past him toward the range, and Graves watched her go, still trying to figure out what about her felt wrong. Or maybe not wrong, just different. Like a puzzle, where all the pieces fit, but the picture they made didn't match what you expected. He keyed his radio. Stone, you read me? Go ahead, Master Chief. We've got a consultant joining the qualification. DOD Special Programs. I need you to set up a lane for her. Silence on the other end. Then, her. That's what I said. Master Chief, are you... Just set up the lane, Stone, and get the candidates formed up. We're starting in 20. Graves drained the last of his coffee and tossed the cup in the trash. 23 candidates, 3 days of hell, and now a mystery woman with eyes that had seen too much, and orders that came from offices he didn't have clearance to know about. This was going to be an interesting morning. The candidates stood in a ragged line at the edge of the shooting range, swaying slightly in the morning wind like trees that had been through too many storms. Their uniforms were still damp from the surf torture 2 hours earlier. 2 hours in 58-degree water, with waves crashing over their heads, while instructors screamed about how easy it would be to just ring the bell and go home. 5 men had rung that bell. The other 23 remained, hollow-eyed, shaking, but standing. That's when they noticed her. Cassandra Thorne stood at the far end of the line, checking the chamber of an M4 carbine with movements that were too smooth, too practiced, too professional for someone who was supposed to be a consultant. The hell is that? Owen Merrick's voice carried across the range. 27 years old, former Army Ranger, built like he'd been carved from stone by someone who believed in function over form. 3 days of Hell Week had scraped some of the arrogance off him, but not all of it. They send us a kindergarten teacher? Laughter rippled through the formation. Tired laughter, but laughter nonetheless. The kind of bonding that happened when men suffered together and found something, anything, to break the tension. Blake Sullivan didn't laugh. 23 years old, Smallest of the group at 5'8" and 160, he'd barely survived the surf torture. Would have quit if the woman hadn't been next to him, whispering something about breathing that somehow kept him from drowning in the cold. He watched her now, seeing something the others missed. She didn't react to the laughter, didn't tense, didn't try to prove anything. Just kept checking her weapon with the kind of methodical precision that spoke of muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions. Master Chief Graves stepped to the front of the formation. "Listen up. This is Cassandra Thorne, civilian consultant. She'll be participating in selected training evolutions. You will treat her with the same respect you'd treat any candidate." "Master Chief," Owen's voice again, "with respect, is this some kind of test, like sensitivity training or something? Does this look like sensitivity training to you, Merrick?" "No, Master Chief." "Outstanding. Then shut your mouth and get ready to shoot." Graves turned to the range safety officer. "Candidates will fire individually. 30 rounds, 100 meters, 80% accuracy minimum to qualify. Failures will reshoot tomorrow. Multiple failures will recycle to the next class." He paused. "Miss Thorne will shoot first." More murmurs. Cass heard them all, heard the doubt, the dismissal, the assumption that she'd embarrass herself and disappear before breakfast. She'd heard it before. 17 times before, at 17 different training facilities over the past 5 years. The laughter always sounded the same. "Shooter, make ready." The range safety officer's voice cut through the morning air. Cass stepped to the firing line, set her stance. Not the squared-up position that amateurs used, but something more subtle. Weight forward, support hand extended along the handguard, elbow locked. Modern technique. The kind that special operations units taught, but most people didn't bother learning because it looked wrong until you understood the physics. 300 meters away, not 100 like Graves had said, a human silhouette target waited in the gray morning light. Cass didn't react to the distance change, didn't complain, just made a mental calculation and adjusted her sight picture by millimeters. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. That was the trick. The thing she'd learned in places that didn't exist on any official map. You could make your body do anything if you knew how to flip the switch. Shut down the fear. Shut down the exhaustion. Shut down everything except the target and the trigger and the tiny space between heartbeats where the shot breaks clean. Compartmentalization. That's what the instructors had called it, before most of them died.
"Ready on the left. Ready on the right. Ready on the firing line."
The RSO's cadence was smooth, practiced, the same words he'd said 10,000 times before.
"Shooters, you may fire when ready."
Cass exhaled once, long and slow, felt her heart rate drop, felt the morning wind against her face, 8 miles per hour from the northwest, adding maybe 2 inches of drift at this range. The first shot surprised her. That was correct technique. You didn't pull the trigger. You pressed until it broke on its own, until muscle memory and controlled breathing made the shot happen without your conscious mind interfering. Center mass. Perfect. The second shot broke the same way. Same hole, or close enough that it didn't matter. She emptied the magazine in 12 seconds. 30 rounds. Steady rhythm, no rush, just smooth trigger presses and controlled breathing, and the mechanical precision of someone who'd learned to shoot when missing meant dying. The last brass casing clinked against the concrete. Cass safed the weapon, locked the bolt back, grounded it, stepped away from the firing line. The range was completely silent, not the silence of respect, the silence of shock. The silence that happens when everyone's trying to process something their brain insists isn't possible. Target.
Graves's voice was strange, strained. The RSO walked down range, retrieved the target, walked back holding it up for everyone to see. One hole. Not a grouping, not a cluster. One single ragged hole where 30 rounds had passed through the exact same point in space, expanding it outward like a flower blooming in slow motion. 300 meters. After 3 days of watching candidates suffer, after pretending to be nothing more than a consultant with a clipboard, 30 rounds, one hole. Explain the shot. Graves wasn't asking. He was demanding. The voice of a man who needed to understand what he'd just witnessed. Cass met his eyes. M4 carbine, 14.5-inch barrel, M855 ball ammunition. Muzzle velocity 2970 feet per second. At 300 meters, bullet drop is approximately 3.6 inches, compensated by sight adjustment. Wind is 8 miles per hour from the northwest, adding roughly 1.8 inches of drift. I held left edge of center mass to compensate. Trigger pull on this particular weapon is approximately 5.9 pounds. I felt the break point at 5.6, controlled the surprise, maintained follow-through for 0.3 seconds after each shot broke. She paused, let the technical explanation hang in the salt air. Standard technique, Master Chief, nothing special. Nobody moved. 23 candidates stared at the target like it was a magic trick they couldn't figure out. Graves stared at Cass like she was a puzzle that had just gotten a lot more complicated. Owen Merrick stared at his boots. Blake Sullivan was writing in a small notebook he'd pulled from his cargo pocket. Every number, every detail. His hands had stopped shaking for the first time in 3 days. Miss Thorne, Graves's voice was carefully controlled. That's not consultant shooting. That's not competitive shooting. That's not any kind of shooting I've seen outside of Tier 1 operators. I told you I'd been trained, Master Chief. By who? People who didn't give me a choice about whether I learned or not. Before Graves could respond, his radio crackled. Master Chief, you have a visitor at the main gate. Says he's expected. Graves keyed the radio. Who is it? Admiral Garrett Holloway. Dev grew. The color drained from Graves's face. DEVGRU. Development Group. The unit that didn't officially exist. The unit that took down bin Laden and hunted high-value targets in places the American public never heard about. And their commander was here, at Hell Week, asking to come in. Graves looked at Cass. She looked back, and something passed between them. Not quite understanding, more like the beginning of it, the first piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Continue qualification, Graves said to the RSO. I need to handle something. He walked toward the gate, and Cass watched him go. Behind her, she heard the whispers starting, heard the speculation, heard Owen Merrick say something about luck and course conditions. Blake appeared at her shoulder, quiet, respectful. Ma'am, that breathing technique you showed me in the surf, the 4-4-4 count, that's not in any of the prep materials I studied. Cass turned to look at him. Really look. Saw the exhaustion etched into his young face. Saw the determination burning underneath. Saw someone who wanted to learn, not just survive. Box breathing, she said quietly. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out. It's designed for extended operations in hostile environments. Days, not hours. The version I showed you is modified for hypothermic conditions specifically. Where did you learn it? From someone who saved my life by teaching me how to save myself? Blake wanted to ask more. She could see it in his eyes, but something in her expression stopped him. A wall going up, a door closing.
"Thank you," he said instead, "for helping me out there. I wouldn't have made it without that technique." "You would have made it. You just would have suffered more." Cass glanced at his notebook. "Keep writing. Keep learning. That's how you survive this. Watch. Listen. Adapt." "That sounds like you've survived something like this before." Cass didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the water station, her hand moving unconsciously to her left forearm, pressing against the fabric, against the ink underneath that nobody here knew about. Not yet. The morning crawled forward like something wounded. The candidates continued their qualification, shooting with hands that trembled and eyes that couldn't quite focus. Most barely made the 80% threshold. 2 failed completely and would reshoot tomorrow, adding one more humiliation to 3 days of accumulated humiliations. Cass sat apart from the group, drinking water in small sips, methodical, controlled. Everything she did was like that, measured, efficient, nothing wasted. Blake sat nearby, not quite with her, but not quite separate. His notebook was open, pages filled with observations, techniques, little details that most people never noticed. "You move different than us," he said quietly. "In the water, on the obstacle course, even just walking. Like you're conserving energy in ways we don't know how to." "That's because you're still learning your bodies," Cass said. "You know how to be strong. You know how to push hard. But you don't know how to be efficient yet. That comes later. After you've been tired enough, long enough, that you don't have a choice except to figure it out." "And you've been that tired?" "Yes." "When?" Cass was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, almost sad. "When I was 19. Blake did the math. She was 28 now. That meant 9 years ago, when most people her age were worried about college exams and weekend parties. She'd been somewhere experiencing something that taught her how to function beyond normal human limits." "What happened when you were 19? Cass looked at him, those old, young eyes meeting his directly. "I learned that some teachers pay for their lessons in blood, and some students survive by becoming something they never thought they could be." She touched her left forearm through the sleeve, a gesture that was becoming familiar to Blake, like she was reaching for something, or checking to make sure it was still there. "Get some rest, Sullivan. Tomorrow's harder." She stood and walked away, and Blake watched her go. He looked down at his notebook, at all the observations he'd made, the techniques, the efficiency, the way she moved through Hell Week like it was just another Tuesday. And he realized that whatever Cassandra Thorne had survived when she was 19, it had been worse than this. Worse than 3 days without sleep. Worse than cold water and soft sand and instructors screaming. Worse than anything buds could throw at them. That's why she moved like she did. That's why her eyes looked older than her face. That's why she could put 30 rounds through one hole after 70 hours of watching other people suffer. Because she'd already suffered worse. And survived. The afternoon brought the obstacle course, the legendary Coronado O course that had broken thousands of SEAL candidates over the decades. Wooden walls, rope climbs, cargo nets, low crawls through sand. Each obstacle designed to find your weakness and exploit it without mercy. 16 candidates remained. 7 more had rung the bell during the morning evolutions, finally accepting that no amount of want or determination could overcome what their bodies simply could not do anymore. Cass ran the course 5th, let the candidates go before her, watched their techniques, watched their mistakes, watched how they used strength where they should have used leverage, force where they should have used finesse. When her turn came, she didn't rush, didn't attack the obstacles like enemies to be conquered. just flowed through them like water finding the path of least resistance. At the wall, she didn't jump for the top. Found handholds that seemed to appear under her fingers. Placements that let her use legs instead of arms, core instead of shoulders. Rose up the vertical surface like smoke rising. The rope climb was physics. Feet locked in a J-hook configuration, using the strongest muscles in her body instead of burning out her arms. Up and over in seconds while candidates twice her size struggled halfway up, arms shaking, grip failing. The low crawl was where she showed something different. She moved like smoke, finding the lowest path, fast but controlled, efficient to the point of being eerie. She crossed the finish line at 4 minutes 14 seconds. The display board showed the previous record, 4 minutes 41 seconds, set 2 years ago by a SEAL candidate who'd gone on to DevGru. Cass walked to the water station, took one long drink, didn't say a word. Behind her, Owen Merrick stared at the board, then at Cass, then back at the board. "Lucky run," he muttered to the candidate next to him. "Course is easier for smaller people, lower center of gravity." But his voice had lost its certainty, lost the edge that came from being absolutely sure you were right. Blake didn't say anything, just wrote in his notebook. Times, techniques, the way she'd used her legs at the wall, the J-hook foot position on the rope, every detail that might mean the difference between success and failure when his own turn came. Graves watched from the instructor platform, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He'd seen thousands of candidates run that course, seen hundreds of trained SEALs run it, seen Olympic athletes and special forces soldiers from every branch. Nobody moved like that. Not on day 3 of Hell Week, not after 70+ hours without real sleep, not without something more than just training, something deeper, something that came from places you couldn't reach in a gym or a classroom. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a number he hadn't called in years, debated for 10 seconds, then pressed dial. 3 rings. Then a woman's voice, professional, cautious. "Commander Webb?" "Pat, it's Duncan Graves. I need a favor." Silence on the other end. Patricia Webb had been the Naval Special Warfare Command Intelligence Liaison for 12 years. She knew things, had clearances that made most admirals jealous. "Graves, it's the middle of Hell Week. This better be important. I need you to run a deep background check on someone. Civilian consultant assigned to my training evolution. Name's Cassandra Thorne." The silence stretched longer this time. 5 seconds. 10. "Duncan, I can't help you with that name." "What do you mean you can't help me?" "I mean that name is flagged 6 ways from Sunday. Requires clearances I don't have. Touches programs I don't have access to." Her voice dropped. "Whatever you think you know about Cassandra Thorne, you don't know anything. And you should stop asking." "Pat, I'm serious, Duncan. That name goes all the way up, all the way up. And whoever she is, she's there for a reason that's above both our pay grades. Who do I call to find out more?" "You don't. You watch. You wait. And if you're smart, you treat her with a lot more respect than I'm guessing you've shown so far." The line went dead. Graves stared at his phone, then looked across the grinder where Cassandra Thorne sat alone, drinking water, looking at something in the distance that nobody else could see. Flagged. Classified. Programs that required clearances a commander with 30 years in the Navy didn't have. Whoever she wasn't a consultant. And whatever she was doing here, it wasn't about combat psychology assessments. Graves slipped his phone back in his pocket and walked toward her. She watched him approach, didn't stand, didn't salute, just waited. "Miss Thorne, we need to talk." "About what, Master Chief?" "About who you really are." Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite sadness, something in between. "I'm exactly what my orders say I am, Master Chief. A civilian consultant observing training methodology."
And what do your orders say about the fact that you shoot like a Tier 1 operator? Move like someone with years of special operations experience? Have a background so classified that people at JSOC won't talk about you? Cass stood slowly, met his eyes. Even at 5'4", she had a presence that made the height difference irrelevant. "My orders say I'm here to observe and assess. That's what I'm doing. Everything else is classified, above my pay grade, need to know." Graves kept his voice level. "I've heard it before, ma'am. Usually means someone's running an operation I'm not read into." "I'm not running an operation." "Then what are you doing?" Cass looked past him at the candidates, at Blake Sullivan writing in his notebook, at Owen Merrick trying to process what he'd witnessed, at 15 other young men who were right at the edge of their limits. "I'm keeping a promise, Master Chief, to someone who can't keep it themselves anymore."
Before Graves could ask what that meant, his radio crackled again. "Master Chief, Admiral Holloway is at the command building. He's requesting you bring Miss Thorne to meet with him immediately." Graves looked at Cass. She looked back. Something passed between them, not understanding yet, but the beginning of it, the edges of a picture starting to form. "Time to get some answers," Graves said. "Maybe." Cass picked up her small pack. "Or maybe time for more questions. That's usually how these things work." They walked toward the command building together, and behind them, Blake Sullivan watched them go. He looked down at his notebook, at all the observations he'd made, at the pattern that was starting to emerge. Cassandra Thorne wasn't just good at these evolutions, she was perfect at them, like someone who'd done them before, or done things so much harder that these seemed easy by comparison. And now an Admiral was here. From DEVGRU. From the unit that didn't officially exist. Blake looked at Owen. "Something's happening." Owen nodded slowly. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by something that looked like respect. Or maybe fear. Or maybe both. "Yeah," Owen said. "Something's definitely happening." They sat in the afternoon sun, exhausted and confused and more curious than they'd been about anything in 3 days. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight brought only questions, and the growing certainty that Cassandra Thorne was something more than they'd imagined. Something dangerous. Something deadly. Something that had survived things they couldn't yet comprehend. And for reasons they didn't understand, she was here to teach them. If they were smart enough to learn. The command building sat at the eastern edge of Coronado Naval Base, a concrete structure built in the 1960s that had seen generations of warriors pass through its doors.
Master Chief Graves walked beside Cassandra Thorne in silence, both of them aware that whatever happened in the next hour would change everything. The afternoon sun beat down on the grinder behind them, where 15 candidates were being led through another round of surf torture. Their screams carried on the wind. Not pain exactly, but the sound of men being pushed past what they thought was possible. Graves had heard those sounds 10,000 times. Today they felt different, like background music to something larger unfolding. They climbed the stairs to the second floor. Graves knocked once on the conference room door. "Enter." The voice was command itself. Decades of authority compressed into a single word. Admiral Garrett Holloway stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the Pacific Ocean.
67 years old, silver hair cut to regulation, posture that belonged to a man who'd spent 40 years in uniform and had never let it bend him. His dress whites were immaculate, the ribbon rack on his chest a colorful testament to 4 decades of classified operations most Americans would never read about. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Master Chief Graves, thank you for coming." His voice carried the particular timbre of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Close the door, please." Graves closed it. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. Holloway turned. His eyes swept over Graves once. Professional assessment, nothing more. Then locked onto Cass. Something changed in his expression. Not quite warmth. More like recognition of a shared experience that couldn't be put into words. "Operator Thorne. It's been a long time." "Admiral." Cass's voice was steady, but Graves heard something underneath. Respect, wariness, and something else. Something that sounded like old grief. "You've been keeping busy, I hear." Holloway moved to the conference table. Sat, gestured for them to do the same. 17 facilities in 5 years. SEAL training, Delta selection, Ranger School, Marine Raiders. Even some allied programs, British SAS, Australian SASR. You've been passing on knowledge without taking credit. That was the idea, sir. And now you're here at Coronado, my facility, my candidates. Holloway's eyes were ice water blue, calm, patient. The eyes of a predator that never rushed because it knew the prey couldn't escape. Why? Same reason as the others, to teach what I was taught, to make sure the knowledge doesn't die. Knowledge. Holloway repeated the word like he was tasting it, testing it. Is that what we're calling it? Cass didn't answer, just met his gaze with those old, young eyes that had seen too much. Graves couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Admiral, with respect, what the hell is going on? Who is she really? Why is her file classified at levels I can't access? Why are you here?" Holloway turned to look at him.
"How much have you figured out, Master Chief?" "Enough to know she's not a consultant. Enough to know she moves like special operations, shoots like Tier 1, has training that doesn't come from any program I recognize." Graves gestured at Cass. "I've run Hell Week 8 years, sir. Never seen anyone perform like this after 3 days no sleep. Never seen anyone shoot 30 rounds through one hole at 300 meters. That's not training. That's something else." "You're right." Holloway stood, walked to the window again. "It is something else. Something that cost 31 lives to develop. Something that Operator Thorne paid for in blood." He turned back. "Master Chief, what do you know about Phantom Protocol?" The name hit Graves like cold water. He'd heard it once, maybe twice, in classified briefings he wasn't supposed to remember. Whispers about a program so dark that even the black operations community didn't talk about it. Joint CIA, JSOC operation, Graves said slowly. Deep cover, long-term insertion. That's all I know. That's more than most. Holloway walked to the door, locked it, came back. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Understood? Yes, sir. Holloway looked at Cass. Do you want to tell him, or should I? You tell it, sir. I'm tired of telling it. There was something in her voice that made Graves's chest tighten. Not fear, not anger, just exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone who'd carried something heavy for too long. Holloway sat again, steepled his fingers. Phantom Protocol ran from 2015 to 2022. 7 years. The concept was simple on paper. Take operators with specific skill sets and insert them into high-value target environments for extended periods. Months, not days. Deep cover, no support, no extraction unless absolutely critical. He paused. If you were compromised, you were on your own. The United States government would disavow all knowledge of your existence. Graves felt his stomach drop. How many operators went through the program? 43. Over 7 years. Volunteers only. The selection process was... Holloway stopped, searched for the word. Darwinian. How many survived? 12. The number hung in the air like smoke. Graves did the math. 43 operators, 12 survivors. That was a 72% casualty rate. Worse than any conventional combat unit. Worse than most special operations programs. Worse than anything Graves had heard of outside of outright suicide missions. Jesus Christ. Operator Thorne entered the program in 2019. Holloway looked at Cass. How old were you? 22, sir. 22. Graves looked at her with new eyes. She was 28 now. That meant she'd spent 6 years carrying whatever she'd experienced in a program that killed nearly 3/4 of the people who attempted it.
Where did you serve? Graves asked quietly. Cass's hand moved to her left forearm, pressed against the fabric, against whatever was underneath. Syria, Iraq, Yemen, places that don't have names on maps anymore. And where did you earn the mark? Holloway's voice was gentle now, the voice of someone who already knew the answer, but needed it said aloud. Cass was quiet for 5 seconds. 10. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Syria, Raqqa Province, March 2020. The room temperatures seemed to drop 10 degrees. Graves had read about Raqqa. Everyone in the special operations community had. ISIS stronghold. Urban warfare at its most brutal. American operators died there. A lot of them. Tell him about your team, Holloway said. Team of 6. Mission was to extract high-value intelligence before ISIS moved it. We had a 72-hour window. Cass's eyes went somewhere else, somewhere far away. Bad intel. Compound was a trap. 2 of ours went down in the first 30 seconds. The rest of us got pinned inside. How long were you pinned? 18 hours. 18 hours. In a hostile compound, surrounded by enemies who would torture you before they killed you if they took you alive. 18 hours of fighting just to survive another minute. Graves had been in combat, 3 tours. He knew what an hour felt like when people were trying to kill you. Knew how time stretched and compressed until seconds felt like hours and hours felt like years. 18 hours was an eternity. Who was your team leader? Holloway asked. Cass's hand tightened on her forearm. Commander Victoria Reeves. And where is Commander Reeves now? Dead, sir. Cass's voice cracked slightly. The first real emotion Graves had heard from her. She died in that compound, gave her life to get me out. Holloway stood, walked to a cabinet against the wall, pulled out a bottle of whiskey in 3 glasses, poured without asking. Handed one to Graves, one to Cass. To Commander Reeves, Holloway said quietly, and the 30 others who didn't come home. They drank. The whiskey burned going down. Graves welcomed it, needed something to cut through the heaviness filling the room. Holloway sat again. Master Chief, I'm going to tell you what happened in Raqqa. Not because you have clearance, you don't, but because you need to understand who's teaching your candidates and why. He looked at Cass. She nodded once. Permission granted.
Commander Victoria Reeves was 41 years old, former Navy, combat veteran. She'd been with Phantom Protocol since 2017. Brilliant tactician, better leader. She and Operator Thorne had been partnered for 8 months when they got the Raqqa mission. Holloway pulled a folder from his briefcase, opened it, slid a photograph across the table. 6 people in desert camouflage, standing in front of a concrete wall, trying to smile despite the exhaustion in their eyes. Cass was there, younger, thinner, looking like she was barely old enough to vote. Next to her, a woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back tight. Commander Reeves. This was taken the night before the insertion, March 15th, 2020, 5 years ago. Holloway tapped the photo. 4 of these people died within 72 hours. 1 died 6 months later from injuries sustained during extract. Operator Thorne is the only one still alive. Graves looked at the photograph, looked at the faces of people who didn't know they were looking at their last sunset. "What happened during those 18 hours?" he asked. Cass set her glass down. "We held the compound. Barely. We had good defensive positions but limited ammunition. No resupply. No reinforcements. Commander Reeves took shrapnel in the first hour. Lower abdomen. I couldn't stop the bleeding." Her voice had gone flat, mechanical. The voice of someone reciting facts because feeling them would be too much. "We called for extraction at hour 12. They tried. Helicopter took fire on approach. Couldn't land. Pilot said they'd try again at first light. But first light never came," Holloway said quietly. "No, sir. At hour 16, Commander Reeves made a decision. She ordered me to take the intelligence we'd recovered and run for the secondary extraction point. Alone." Cass looked down at her hands. "She stayed behind with the 2 other wounded, said she'd buy me time." Graves didn't need to hear the rest. He could see it in Cass's eyes, in the way her shoulders had drawn in the hands still pressed against her forearm like she was holding on to something invisible. "Commander Reeves held that compound for another 2 hours, Holloway said. "Intel suggests she and the other 2 operators killed 17 enemy combatants before the position was finally breached. Rather than be taken alive, Commander Reeves triggered the demolition charges they'd set as a last resort. The blast killed everyone within 50 meters. The silence that followed was complete. Outside, seagulls cried. Waves crashed against the beach. The world kept turning like it always did, indifferent to the stories of warriors who died in places most people would never hear about. "What were Commander Reeves's last words?" Holloway asked. Cass pulled something from inside her shirt, a compass, brass, old, worn smooth by years of handling. "She gave me this. Said her father carried it in Grenada in 1983. Always points home." Cass's voice was thick now. She said, "Get home, Cass. That's an order. And when you do, teach them what I taught you. Pass the torch before it dies." She looked up. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. "So that's what I've been doing for 5 years. Passing the torch. Teaching what she taught me. Making sure her death meant something." Graves understood now. Understood the old eyes and the young face. Understood the perfect technique and the mechanical precision. Understood why she moved like someone who'd been through something worse than Hell Week. Because she had been through something worse. She'd been through real hell. The kind with no instructors to pull you out when it got too bad. The kind where the people trying to break you absolutely wanted to kill you. The kind where your mentor died, buying you 30 more seconds to live. "Why are you here, Admiral?" Graves asked. "Why now?" Holloway finished his whiskey.
Because Operator Thorne has been doing this in the shadows for 5 years, 17 facilities, always appearing as a consultant, always teaching without credit, always disappearing before anyone could ask too many questions. He looked at Cass. I found out about it 2 years ago, tracked her movements, saw the results. Graduation rates up, combat casualty rates down. She was making a measurable difference. So why reveal her now? Because I asked her to stop hiding, Holloway stood. Because warriors like Commander Reeves and the 31 others who died in Phantom Protocol shouldn't be forgotten. Their knowledge shouldn't die with them. And Operator Thorne shouldn't have to carry this alone anymore. He walked to the door, unlocked it, turned back. Master Chief, in 30 minutes you're going to form up your candidates. I'm going to tell them what I've told you. Some of it anyway. The parts they're cleared to hear. His eyes found Cass. And Operator Thorne is going to show them something. Are you ready? Cass wiped her eyes, stood. When she spoke, the mechanical flatness was gone. Something else had replaced it. Something harder. Yes, sir. Outstanding. Holloway opened the door. Get your candidates formed up, Master Chief. It's time they learned who's really been teaching them. He walked out. Graves and Cass remained in the conference room, silence stretching between them. I'm sorry, Graves said finally, for doubting you, for not understanding. You couldn't understand. That was the point. Cass tucked the compass back inside her shirt. Most people can't understand until they've lost someone who mattered. Until they've had to keep going when everything says to quit. These candidates, they don't know how lucky they are, learning from someone like you. They're not lucky. They're just smart enough to listen. Cass moved toward the door, stopped. Master Chief, in about an hour, those boys are going to look at me differently. Some will be inspired. Some will be terrified. Some won't know what to feel. That's normal. What matters is what they do with it. What do you want them to do with it? Cass looked back at him. Survive. That's all Commander Reeves wanted for me. That's all I want for them. Survive long enough to pass it on. She walked out, and Graves stood alone in the conference room.
Looking at the photograph still on the table, 6 faces, 5 dead, 1 survivor, carrying the weight of all of them. He picked up the photo, studied Commander Reeves's face, saw the intelligence there, the strength, the particular kind of courage that came from knowing you might die and choosing to serve anyway. Graves had served 30 years, 3 combat deployments, a silver star he never talked about. He'd thought he understood sacrifice, but looking at that photograph, he realized he'd only understood the surface of it, the easy part. Dying for your country was hard. Living for it, carrying the dead with you every day, making sure their sacrifice meant something, that was harder. Cassandra Thorne had been doing the hard part for 5 years, alone, until now. Graves set the photo down, straightened his uniform, walked out to form up his candidates, and watch their world change forever.
The afternoon sun was lower now, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. The 15 remaining candidates stood in formation on the grinder, still damp from surf torture, still shaking from exhaustion. Still standing, because quitting wasn't an option they'd allow themselves to consider. They snapped to attention when Graves appeared. Behind him, Admiral Holloway walked with the measured pace of someone who'd made this walk 10,000 times. Behind Holloway, Cassandra Thorne moved like a ghost. At ease, Graves's voice carried across the grinder. Listen up. We have a visitor. Some of you may recognize the name. Admiral Garrett Holloway, Commander Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A ripple went through the formation. DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6. The most elite unit in the most elite branch of the most powerful military in human history. And their commander was here. At Hell Week. Blake Sullivan's hand trembled as he wrote in his notebook.
Owen Merrick stood straighter, trying to look worthy of the attention. The others just stared, trying to process what this meant. Holloway stepped forward, didn't smile, didn't try to put them at ease, just looked at them with eyes that had seen everything and remained unimpressed by most of it. Gentlemen, you've been training with someone for the past 3 days, a civilian consultant named Cassandra Thorne. You've watched her perform. Some of you have learned from her. Most of you have doubted her. He paused. That ends now. The candidates didn't move, barely breathed. Operator Thorne, Holloway's voice softened slightly, stepped forward. Cass moved to stand beside him. 5'4" next to his 6'1". Small next to his presence, but somehow not diminished by the comparison. Roll up your left sleeve. The command was gentle but absolute. Cass hesitated for 1 second. Just one. Then reached down and began rolling up the sleeve of her compression shirt. The fabric pulled back inch by inch. The tattoo revealed itself like a secret being forced into daylight. A serpent, black ink, coiled around a combat knife. The snake's body wrapped the blade from guard to tip, every scale rendered in perfect detail. Its head was raised, fangs bared, ready to strike. Professional work. Military precision. The kind of tattoo that wasn't decoration. It was documentation. Blake's mouth fell open. Owen took an involuntary step backward. The others stared like they were seeing something from another world. Holloway leaned closer. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But in the absolute silence of the grinder, it carried like thunder. Phantom Protocol. Class of 2019. Someone gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. Blake's hand was frozen over his notebook, pen hovering. Unable to write, because his brain couldn't process what his ears were hearing. Holloway straightened, turned to face the formation. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the entire base. You've been mocking someone who completed missions most of you will never be cleared to read about. He let that sink in, let it settle into their bones. That mark isn't ink, it's a receipt. Paid in blood and silence. He began to pace, slowly, each word measured. Phantom Protocol, 2015 to 2022. CIA and JSOC Joint Operation. Deep penetration. Zero footprint. If you were compromised, you were on your own. No extraction, no support, no acknowledgement that you ever existed. The candidates' faces had gone pale. Even Owen, with his ranger experience and his arrogance, looked like he'd been hit by something he couldn't fight. 43 operators went through that program over 7 years. Holloway stopped pacing, looked at each candidate in turn. 12 came out alive. The math hit them like ice water. 43 operators, 12 survivors.
a 72% casualty rate.
Blake's pen fell from his fingers, clattered against the concrete. The sound was obscenely loud. The woman you've been calling consultant is one of those 12, Holloway gestured at Cass. She entered the program at 22 years old, younger than most of you. And she survived things that killed operators twice her size with 10 times her experience. He moved to stand directly in front of Cass. Where did you earn the mark, Operator Thorne? Cass's voice was steady, flat, the voice of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Syria, Raqqa Province, March 2020. Team composition: 6 operators, 2 survivors. Your team leader? Cass's jaw clenched. Commander Victoria Reeves. And where is Commander Reeves now? Dead, sir. Killed in action, holding a defensive position, so I could extract with mission-critical intelligence. The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Even the ocean seemed to have paused. Holloway turned back to the candidates. Commander Victoria Reeves was one of the finest operators I ever had the privilege to serve with. She trained half the instructors at DevGru. She survived 3 deployments in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and 18 months deep cover in Syria. His voice hardened. She died in a compound in Raqqa, fighting 17 ISIS combatants for 2 hours while wounded, so that Operator Thorne could complete the mission. When the position was finally breached, Commander Reeves triggered demolition charges rather than be taken alive. The blast killed everyone within 50 meters. Blake had tears streaming down his face now. Owen's hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white. Operator Thorne was 24 years old when she walked out of that compound alone, covered in her team leader's blood, carrying intelligence that saved American lives, and carrying a promise. Holloway looked at Cass. What promise? Cass pulled out the compass, held it up so everyone could see. Commander Reeves gave me this. Her father carried it in Grenada. She said, "Get home. That's an order. And when you do, teach them what I taught you." Her voice broke slightly on the last words. She cleared her throat, continued. So for 5 years, I've been keeping that promise. 17 facilities, always in the shadows, always teaching, always passing on what she died to give me. She looked at the candidates, at 15 young men who'd been laughing at her 72 hours ago. You wanted to know where I learned to shoot, where I learned to move, where I learned to function after 3 days without sleep. She tapped the tattoo. I learned it in places where failure meant death, where there was no bell to ring, no instructors to pull me out when it got too hard, where the people trying to break me absolutely wanted to kill me. She stepped forward, walked along the formation, looking each candidate in the eye. This, she gestured at the base, at the ocean, at Hell Week, is practice, controlled stress. It's hard. It's supposed to be hard. But it's not the hardest thing, not even close. She stopped in front of Blake, looked down at his notebook on the ground, at the pages filled with observations. You've been writing. Good. Keep writing. Because what I'm going to teach you over the next 24 hours might save your life someday, might save your team. And if it does, then Commander Reeves didn't die for nothing. Then the 31 others who died in Phantom Protocol didn't die for nothing. She stepped back, stood at attention.
I'm not a consultant. I'm a warrior who survived something you can't imagine. And I'm here because Admiral Holloway asked me to stop hiding, to teach you openly, to make sure the knowledge doesn't die with my generation. Holloway moved beside her. Gentlemen, you have a choice.
You can continue Hell Week with Operator Thorne teaching you openly, or you can request a different instructor. There will be no judgment either way. This is above what we normally ask of candidates. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Blake stepped forward, came to attention, saluted. Ma'am, I want to learn. Whatever you're willing to teach. Owen was next, then the others, one by one, until all 15 candidates stood at attention, requesting to continue. Holloway nodded slowly. Outstanding. Then training resumes in 1 hour. Use this time to reconsider everything you thought you knew about capability and appearance. He turned to Graves. Master Chief, your evolution. Your call. Graves stepped forward, looked at his candidates, looked at Cass, made his decision. Operator Thorne, you're cleared to teach as you see fit. Whatever these men need to survive, you give them. Yes, Master Chief. And gentlemen, Graves's voice hardened, you will treat Operator Thorne with the respect she's earned. Not because she's a woman, not because she has a sad story, but because she's survived real combat and you haven't. She's earned that respect in blood. Don't forget it. Hoo-yah, Master Chief. Dismissed for 1 hour. Fallout. The formation scattered, but nobody went far. They clustered in small groups, voices hushed, eyes constantly finding Cass and then looking away. Blake picked up his notebook, walked slowly toward where Cass stood with Holloway and Graves. Ma'am, permission to ask a question? Cass turned. Go ahead, Sullivan. The breathing technique you taught me in the surf. That came from Raqqa, hour 14 of the siege. I was hyperventilating from stress. Commander Reeves taught me the 4-4-4 count. Said it would keep me functional. She was right. Blake's eyes were red from crying, but his voice was steady. I'll never forget it, ma'am, and I'll pass it on. I promise. I know you will. That's why I taught you. Blake nodded, started to walk away. Stopped. Ma'am, one more thing. Thank you for trusting us with this, for showing us who you really are. Cass touched the compass through her shirt. You want to thank me? Survive. Go on deployments. Come home. Teach the next generation. That's how you thank me. That's how you thank Commander Reeves. Yes, ma'am. He walked away. Cass watched him go. Holloway stood beside her. You did well. That was hard. Everything's hard, sir. This was just a different kind of hard. How do you feel? Cass thought about the question. Really thought about it. For 5 years she'd been hiding, teaching in shadows, never taking credit, never explaining, just passing on knowledge and disappearing before anyone could ask questions. And now it was all out there. The truth, the tattoo, the bodies, the promise. Lighter, she said finally. I feel lighter. Good. Holloway checked his watch. You've got an hour before the final briefing. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day of their lives. Yes, sir. Holloway walked toward the command building. Graves followed. Cass stood alone on the grinder, the afternoon sun warm on her face, the compass warm against her chest. Around her, 15 candidates tried to process what they'd learned, tried to understand what it meant, tried to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about strength and courage and sacrifice. And tomorrow, Cass would teach them everything Commander Victoria Reeves had died to give her. Every tactic, every technique, every hard-won lesson from 18 hours in hell. She would pass the torch, just like she'd promised. The sun sank lower, shadows lengthened, and somewhere in the growing darkness, the ghost of Commander Reeves smiled. The chain hadn't broken. The knowledge would survive. The torch burned on. The briefing room was sparse. Folding chairs arranged in rows, a projection screen at the front, maps covering the walls, showing terrain that looked like it had been designed specifically to kill people. The 15 remaining candidates filed in at 1800 hours, moving with the particular stiffness of men who'd been awake for 80 hours and were running on nothing but will and whatever chemicals their adrenal glands could still produce. Blake Sullivan sat in the front row. Owen Merrick took the seat beside him. Nobody spoke. They just waited, eyes on Cassandra Thorne, standing at the front of the room, with Master Chief Graves and Admiral Holloway flanking her like honor guards. The light from the setting sun came through the windows in horizontal bars, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Combat lighting, the old-timers called it. The light that made everything look either beautiful or terrible, depending on what you were looking at. Cass waited until every candidate was seated, until the door closed, until the room settled into the kind of silence that preceded important words. Tomorrow, at 0400, you will be inserted into the mountain training area for a 72-hour survival and evasion exercise. Her voice carried without being loud. The voice of someone who'd learned to command attention through competence rather than volume. Your objective is simple. Reach the extraction point 30 kilometers away without being captured or killed. She clicked a remote. The projection screen lit up with a topographical map. Terrain that looked like God had crumpled it up and thrown it away. Steep ridges, deep canyons, very few flat spaces. You will be hunted by an opposing force of veteran SEAL operators. They know this terrain. They have vehicles. They have communications. They have thermal imaging. You have what you're carrying and what you've learned over the past 4 days. Blake was writing furiously in his notebook. Owen just stared at the map, trying to calculate routes, trying to find advantages that probably didn't exist. Graves stepped forward. Rules of engagement. Simunition only. Hits to torso or head count as kills. 3 limb hits equal 1 kill. If you're killed, you sit where you fall until the exercise ends. No rescue. No second chances. He paused, let the weight of it settle. Historical pass rate for this exercise is 60%. That means on average 6 of you will make it to extraction. The other 9 will fail. Failure means you recycle to the next BUDS class. Start the entire program over from day 1. Someone in the back row swore softly. Blake's hand trembled as he wrote. 4 days of suffering, 72 hours of additional hell, and a 40% chance of having to do it all again. Admiral Holloway moved to stand beside Cass. I've watched this exercise conducted dozens of times over my career. The candidates who succeed aren't the strongest or the fastest. They're the ones who think, who adapt, who work together instead of competing with each other. His eyes swept the room, landed on each candidate for a moment. You have access to someone who survived worse than anything this exercise can throw at you. I suggest you use that resource wisely. He walked to the door, stopped, looked back. Operator Thorne will accompany you as an observer and advisor. She can guide. She can teach. She cannot fight for you. This is your test, not hers. He opened the door. Make her proud. Make Commander Reeves proud.
Make me proud. He left. The door closed behind him with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid. Graves looked at Cass, nodded once, walked out. And then it was just Cass and 15 exhausted young men who desperately wanted to succeed and had no idea if they were capable of it. Cass let the silence stretch. 10 seconds. 20. Let them feel the weight of what was coming.
"I'm going to teach you how to survive tomorrow," she said finally. "Not by being stronger or faster or tougher than the opposition. You're not. They're veteran SEALs. You're candidates who've been awake for 4 days. In a straight fight, you lose every time." She walked to the map, tapped a spot in the middle of the terrain. "So you don't fight straight. You fight smart. You use terrain. You use timing. You use the fact that they expect you to be predictable." She looked at them. "Your biggest advantage is that they think they know how you'll behave. Prove them wrong." Blake raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do we do that?" "By learning what I learned in Raqqa." Cass pulled a chair to the front, sat backward on it, made herself smaller, less threatening. "For the next 4 hours, I'm going to teach you everything Commander Reeves taught me about surviving when you're outgunned and outnumbered. Some of it will sound crazy. Some of it will go against everything you've been taught."
That's fine. You don't have to use all of it. Just remember it. And when you're out there tomorrow, bleeding and tired and sure you're about to fail, maybe one thing I said will save you. She gestured at their notebooks. "Write. All of you. Every word. Because I'm only saying this once." 15 pens hit paper, and Cassandra Thorne began to teach. She talked about thermal evasion, about how thermal imaging saw heat differentials, not people, about how moving along water sources confused the signature, about how thermal gradients were most chaotic at dawn and dusk, the transitions, when the Earth was heating or cooling rapidly. She talked about movement formations, about how military doctrine said to spread out to minimize casualties from single engagements, about how that was wrong for this scenario, about how prey moved in tight groups for mutual protection and combined awareness. She talked about decision-making under stress,
About how you had 2 seconds to decide, break contact and evade, or fight through. About how you read terrain and numbers and positioning to make that call. About how sometimes running was survival, and sometimes running was death. Blake's hand cramped from writing. Owen had filled 6 pages. Even the candidates who'd been skeptical were writing like their lives depended on it. Because maybe they did. "Questions," Cass said after 2 hours. "Real questions, not easy ones." Owen raised his hand. "Ma'am, you said sometimes running is death. How do you know which is which?" "You feel it." Cass stood, walked to the map. "If the enemy has clear advantage, high ground, superior numbers, better position, break contact. If you have advantage, exploit it, fast and hard. If neither side has advantage, create one." "How do you create advantage when everything's equal?" "Surprise, speed, violence of action." She tapped the map. "The OPFOR expects you to react predictably. They expect you to run when engaged. So sometimes you do the opposite. Sometimes you attack when they expect you to flee. That's creating advantage from nothing." Blake raised his hand. "Ma'am, in Raqqa, when you were pinned for 18 hours, how did you stay functional that long?" The room went quiet. That was the question everyone wanted to ask, but
nobody had the courage to voice. Cass sat again, looked at Blake, really looked at him. Compartmentalization. I shut down everything except what was necessary. Fear, pain, exhaustion, I locked them away, dealt with them later. She paused. The price for that is you pay for it all at once when the mission ends. Every emotion you didn't let yourself feel comes back like a wave you've been holding back with your bare hands. Is that why you don't sleep much? Part of it, Cass touched the compass through her shirt. The other part is, I see their faces when I close my eyes. Commander Reeves, the others.
All the ones who didn't make it out. Does it get easier? No. You just get better at carrying it. Blake nodded slowly, wrote that down word for word. Another candidate, Williams, young and scared but still standing, raised his hand. Ma'am, what was the worst moment in those 18 hours? Cass was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, more human. Hour 16. Commander Reeves was losing too much blood. I knew she wasn't going to make it. She knew it too. And she looked at me and said, I need you to leave me here. Take the intel and run. Cass's eyes were distant. I said no. She said it wasn't a request. It was an order. And I had a choice. Disobey and we both die. Or obey and maybe I live long enough to make her sacrifice mean something. The silence was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. What did you choose? Williams asked. I obeyed. I took the intel. I ran. And 2 hours later, I heard the explosion that killed her and the last 2 members of my team. Cass looked at Williams. That was the worst moment. Not the fear, not the pain. The moment I left her behind, knowing she was going to die. How do you live with that? By making sure it meant something. By teaching you, so maybe your team leader doesn't have to make that choice. By passing on the knowledge so the next generation survives. She stood. That's how you live with it. You turn the pain into purpose. Owen stood, came to attention. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I mocked you, called you dead weight. I was wrong. I was an arrogant fool. You were a ranger who'd lost his team and couldn't face training more people to die, Cass said quietly. I understand that, but you're here now. You're learning. That's what matters. How did you know about my team? I didn't, but I recognized the look, the guilt, the certainty that you failed somehow. She walked to stand in front of him. You didn't fail them, Merrick. Bad luck failed them. Bad intel failed them. The mission failed them. You survived. Now honor them by making sure the next team doesn't die the way yours did. Owen's eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. Yes, ma'am, I will. He sat. Blake stood. Ma'am, one more question. Tomorrow when we're out there, if we get in trouble, if everything's falling apart, what's the one thing we should remember? Cass smiled slightly. First smile they'd seen from her in 4 days. The quiet ones survive. She tapped her temple. Think before you act. Move before you're seen. Shoot before you're heard. Every problem has a solution if you're calm enough to find it. Commander Reeves taught me that. I'm teaching you. Pass it on when your turn comes. We will, Blake said. I promise. I know you will. That's why I'm here.
The briefing continued until 2200 hours. 4 hours of tactics and techniques and lessons learned in blood. When it ended, the candidates stumbled out into the California night, minds full and bodies empty, trying to prepare for what was coming. Blake lingered, waited until the room cleared. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Do you think Commander Reeves would be proud of what you've done, the teaching, the promise you kept?" Cass looked at the compass in her hand, turned it over, read the inscription on the back that she'd memorized years ago. "Home is not a place. Home is who you are when everything else is gone." She looked up. "I think she'd be proud that I'm still standing, that I didn't quit, that I found a way to turn her death into something that saves lives." She paused. "But you should ask me that question in 30 years, if I'm still standing then, if I've passed this on to enough people that the chain doesn't break. Then I'll know for sure." "You'll still be standing," Blake said with absolute certainty. "People like you don't quit. People like me quit every day, Sullivan. We just don't let anyone see it." She packed up her materials. "Get 4 hours of sleep. That's an order. You'll need it." "Yes, ma'am." Blake walked out. Cass stood alone in the briefing room, looking at the map on the screen. 30 kilometers of terrain designed to break people. 15 candidates who wanted to succeed. One promise to keep. She touched the tattoo on her forearm, felt the raised edges of the serpent, felt the weight of 31 ghosts. "Tomorrow, Commander," she whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow they'll understand what you taught me." The projection screen flickered off. Darkness filled the room. And somewhere in that darkness, the torch still burned. The trucks rolled out at 0400 hours. 15 candidates, 1 observer. 3 days of hunting and being hunted ahead. The California night was clear and cold. Stars bright enough to navigate by if you knew how. Cass sat near the tailgate, watching the candidates' faces. Some showed fear. Some showed determination. Most showed exhaustion so profound that emotion had become a luxury they couldn't afford. Blake sat across from her, notebook secured in a waterproof pouch on his chest rig. Owen beside him, the former ranger, having positioned himself not at the front where the leaders sat, not at the back where the strongest protected the retreat, but in the middle, where he could help anyone who needed it. Leadership, Cass thought. Real leadership. The kind you couldn't teach in a classroom. The truck stopped. The rear gate dropped. Cold mountain air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and stone and the particular emptiness of wilderness that had never been tamed. "Insertion point," the driver called. 30 seconds. The candidates shouldered their packs, checked their gear one final time, looked at each other with the particular intensity of people who knew they were about to face something hard together. Cass jumped down first. The candidates followed, formed up in the darkness without being told, muscle memory and training taking over when conscious thought became too difficult. Master Chief Graves's voice came over the radio. 72 hours starts now. Good luck. Then silence. Just 15 candidates and 1 observer standing in the wilderness, under stars that had witnessed this same scene play out thousands of times over decades of Bud's training. Cass gathered them in a tight circle, spoke quietly. "The OPFOR expects you to head directly toward extraction. That's the shortest route. It's also the most predictable. We're taking a different path." "Which path?" Blake asked. "The difficult one." She pulled out a map, showed them. "Through the canyon system to the west. It adds 8 kilometers, but gives us terrain advantage.
The OP4 vehicles can't follow us there. We'll be invisible. Owen studied the map. I know that canyon. Trained there 2 years ago. It's rough terrain, but defensible if we're engaged. Exactly. Cass looked at each of them. You take point, Merrick. Sullivan, you navigate. Everyone else stays tight. No talking unless absolutely necessary. Hand signals only. Move. They moved. The first 3 hours went smoothly. Owen led them through terrain that would have stopped vehicles and slowed most infantry to a crawl. Cass guided from the rear, occasionally tapping shoulders to adjust positioning, pointing out potential threats before they became actual ones. The candidates were learning, adapting, becoming something more than they'd been. Dawn broke over the mountains. They'd covered 9 kilometers, 21 remaining, 69 hours left. That's when the first shot cracked through the morning air. Candidate Jackson grabbed his shoulder.
Orange paint bloomed across his uniform like a flower opening. Simunition, not deadly, but in the context of the exercise, he was dead. "Contact left," Owen shouted. Chaos erupted. Some candidates dove for cover, others froze. 2 tried to return fire without identifying the target. Panic spreading like wildfire through dry grass. Cass's voice cut through like a blade. "Cease fire. Break contact. Fall back to the ravine. Now." The authority in her voice was absolute. The voice of someone who'd given orders under real fire and had them obeyed because disobedience meant death. They ran. Not gracefully, not professionally, but they ran. More shots cracked behind them. Another candidate went down. Peterson, former Marine who'd been struggling since day 2. Orange paint across his back. 13 remaining. They reached the ravine and collapsed against the rocky walls, breathing hard, pulse racing, fear written across every face. Cass appeared among them, not breathing hard, not afraid, just calm and controlled, and exactly what they needed to see. "What went wrong?" she asked. Owen spoke first. "I didn't see them. They were positioned above us, using the ridge for cover. I walked us right into their kill zone." "What should you have done differently?" "Scouted the high ground before committing to the route. Never let the enemy have terrain advantage." "Good. Learn it. Don't forget it." She looked at the others. "Anyone else?" Blake raised his hand. "How did they find us? We were careful." "You were careful by training standards. They're careful by operational standards. There's a difference." Cass pulled out her map. "The OP4 has done this dozens of times. They know the terrain. They know the likely routes, including the unpredictable ones. They were waiting because they knew eventually someone would try exactly what we tried." "So what do we do now?" Williams asked. The youngest candidate, 23 years old, looking like he was about to break. Cass looked at each of them. 13 exhausted, scared, determined faces. 13 people who were learning what it meant to survive under pressure. "We do something they won't expect." She told them the plan. Their eyes widened. Some started to object. She raised a hand and they fell silent. "I know it's risky. I know it sounds insane. But predictable gets you killed. We need to be unpredictable. Are you with me?" Blake nodded first, then Owen. One by one, the others followed. "Good. Move out in 5 minutes. And remember, the team that thinks together survives together." They moved. The next 12 hours were the longest of their lives. Cass's plan was audacious. Instead of continuing toward extraction, they circled back, retraced their steps, found the OP4 position that had ambushed them, and set up their own ambush. 3 hours of waiting. Absolute silence. Muscles cramping. Insects crawling. The sun beating down.
every instinct screaming to move, to do something, to stop waiting. But Cass had taught them about patience, about how real operators could wait days for the right moment, about how the hardest part of combat wasn't the fighting, it was the waiting before the fighting. Then the Op 4 team appeared. 4 veteran operators moving through the terrain, searching for the candidates they assumed were still running. Blake gave the signal. 13 weapons opened fire simultaneously. The Op 4 team went down in seconds, orange paint covering their tactical vests. The team leader, a Master Chief with 30 years of experience, stood slowly, looked at the candidates who'd just ambushed him, started laughing. Well played. Didn't see that coming. Owen stepped forward. Thank you, Master Chief. Don't thank me. Thank whoever taught you to think like that. His eyes found Cass in the shadows. That was your idea, wasn't it, Operator? It was a team decision, Cass said. Sure it was. He shook his head, still smiling. There are 2 more Op 4 elements between you and extraction. They know what happened here. We radioed it in. They'll be ready for you. We'll be ready for them, Owen said. The Master Chief nodded. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Good hunting, candidates. You've earned it. He walked away with his team. The candidates stood in the aftermath of their first victory, first proof that they could be hunters as well as prey. Blake turned to Cass. That was incredible. We actually beat them. You beat them. I just suggested the tactic. You executed it. But you knew they'd come back through. You knew they'd underestimate us. I knew they'd be predictable. Experienced operators often are. They've been doing this so long they forget that unconventional solutions exist. She checked her map. We've covered 12 kilometers, 18 to go, 2 more Op 4 teams waiting, 61 hours remaining. Don't celebrate yet. The celebration died. Reality reasserted itself. Move out, Owen commanded. We've given away our position. We need distance before they reorganize. They moved. The second day brought new challenges. Around hour 30, candidate Reynolds started hallucinating. Sleep deprivation combined with physical exhaustion had pushed his brain past its limits. He kept seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices that didn't exist. Cass recognized the signs immediately. Merrick, Sullivan, flank him. Keep him moving. Talk to him constantly. Don't let him drift. Is he going to be okay? Blake asked. He'll be fine once he sleeps, but that won't happen until we reach extraction. Until then, keep him grounded. Keep him connected to reality. They took turns walking beside Reynolds, talking to him about anything and everything. Family, sports, food, anything to keep his mind anchored to the present instead of floating away into the hallucinations. Reynolds stumbled through the terrain, supported by teammates who refused to leave him behind. That was the lesson. The real lesson. Not tactics, not marksmanship, not physical endurance. The team survives together or not at all. Hour 54. 8 kilometers from extraction. The second Op 4 team found them. This time, the candidates were ready. They'd been reading terrain like Cass taught them. They'd spotted the likely ambush position. They'd prepared a response. When the shots came, they executed a flanking maneuver that caught the Op 4 off guard. 2 candidates took hits, wounded, not killed, but they drove the hunters back and created an opening. 11 candidates remaining, 6 kilometers to go, 18 hours left. Cass moved among them, checking wounds, assessing readiness. Blake's arm had been grazed, flesh wound that hurt but didn't impair function. Owen had taken a round to the thigh.
He was limping, but refused to slow down. "We're close," Cass said.
"One more Op 4 element. They'll be waiting at the extraction point, the final defense."
"How do we get through?" Blake asked. "Together." She told them the final plan, the one that would determine everything. 6 hours later, they executed it. Owen led a diversionary team, drew the Op 4's attention with noise and movement, made them think the main force was coming from the north. Blake led the actual assault from the south, through terrain the Op 4 thought was impassable. Cass guided them through the impossible terrain, showed them handholds that shouldn't exist, paths that shouldn't work, gave them every trick she'd learned in places far more dangerous than California mountains. The final assault lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, the Op 4 commander, a senior chief with combat experience in 3 theaters, stood among the orange paint splattered across his team and shook his head in disbelief. "You actually did it. You crazy bastards actually did it."
Blake checked his watch. "Hour 71, 13 minutes. We're 47 minutes early." The extraction point was theirs. Master Chief Graves' voice came over the radio. "Extraction confirmed. Well done, candidates. Transport arriving in 20 minutes. 11 exhausted, wounded, triumphant people stood in that clearing. 72 hours of hunting and being hunted. 30 kilometers of rough terrain. 3 Op 4 teams neutralized. They'd done it." Blake looked at Cass. Tears were streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the dirt and camouflage paint. "Thank you. For everything." Cass touched his shoulder briefly, that small gesture of connection that meant more than words. "You did the work. You made the decisions. You survived. That's on you, not me. But you showed us how. That's what survivors do. We pass it on." Owen limped over. His face was a mask of exhaustion and triumph. "Ma'am, I owe you more than an apology. You taught us something my ranger instructors never could. You taught us that thinking beats strength every time. Your ranger instructors knew that. They just didn't have time to teach it properly." Cass looked at the mountains around them. "You learned it now. That's what matters. Will we see you again after this?" Cass looked out at the terrain they'd conquered together, at the crucible that had forged something new from raw material. "Probably not. I don't stay anywhere long. Old habits." "Where will you go?" "Somewhere I can teach without all this." She gestured at the tactical gear, the weapons, the military apparatus surrounding them. "There are other ways to pass on what I've learned. Quieter ways." The transport arrived. They loaded up. 11 survivors, 1 observer, a bond forged in fire that would last the rest of their lives. The truck rolled back toward Coronado. Blake sat across from Cass one final time, notebook in his hands, pen ready. "Ma'am, that thing you said about survivors paying a price, about broken and incredible being the same thing, is it worth it?" Cass thought about the question, really thought. 5 years of teaching, 17 facilities, hundreds of students, all of them carrying pieces of Commander Reeves's knowledge into the future. "Ask me again in 30 years if I'm still standing, if I've passed on enough that the chain doesn't break. Then I'll tell you if it was worth it. And if you're not still standing, then it won't matter what I think. What will matter is whether you're standing, whether you pass it on, whether the torch keeps burning." The truck rolled through the gates of Coronado at 1500 hours exactly. 11 survivors, 11 people who'd walked into hell and walked out the other side. They dismounted slowly, bodies screaming from 72 hours of sustained stress. But their eyes were different now, harder, clearer. The eyes of people who discovered something about themselves they hadn't known before. Master Chief Graves stood waiting. His expression had changed since the beginning of Hell Week. The skepticism was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. Outstanding work. All of you. Hit the showers. Chow at 1800. Graduation ceremony at 2000. The candidates moved toward the barracks. Slow. Exhausted. Triumphant. Cass hung back. Graves approached her. What you did out there, that wasn't observation. That was leadership. I guided. They led themselves. Don't be modest. I've been running Hell Week 8 years. Never seen a class perform like that. Never seen candidates adapt that quickly. Think that clearly. Work together that effectively. He paused. You changed them. In 4 days, you turned a group of individuals into a team. That's not training. That's transformation. Cass looked at him. Really looked. Saw the career warrior beneath the hard exterior. The man who dedicated his life to creating better soldiers, better people. You do the same thing every cycle. Break them down, build them up, show them what they're capable of. I break them down. You showed them how to rebuild themselves. There's a difference. Silence stretched between them. Two professionals recognizing something in each other. Respect earned through observed competence. Admiral Holloway wants to see you before the ceremony. Command building. I expected he would. Whatever happens next, I want you to know it was an honor having you here. If you ever want to come back, the door is open. Cass extended her hand. Graves shook it firmly. Thank you, Master Chief, for giving me the chance to keep a promise. She walked toward the command building. Graves watched her go, then turned toward the barracks, where 11 survivors were learning what hot water and clean clothes felt like after 3 days in the wilderness. The graduation ceremony began at 2000 hours. The Coronado Amphitheater had been transformed. Chairs arranged in neat rows. A podium at the front. Flags flanking the stage. Families filled the seats. Parents, siblings, spouses, who'd waited and worried through Hell Week without knowing if their loved ones would make it. 11 survivors sat in the front row. Clean uniforms, fresh haircuts, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Blake's family was there. His mother crying. His father standing straighter than Blake had ever seen him stand. His younger sister bouncing with excitement. Olin's parents hadn't come. Some family drama that nobody quite understood. But he didn't seem to mind. The team was his family now. Reynolds sat in the middle, still looking slightly dazed. The hallucinations had faded, but the memory of them lingered. He'd learned something about his own limits, about how far the human mind could be pushed, and about how teammates could hold you together when you couldn't hold yourself. Master Chief Graves stood at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, we're gathered here to recognize the achievements of Bud's Class 342. These 11 individuals have completed one of the most demanding military training programs in the world. They've proven themselves physically, mentally, and spiritually. They've earned the right to call themselves SEAL candidates. Applause rippled through the crowd. Blake's mother was crying again. His father's chest swelled with pride. But tonight I want to talk about something different. Something that happened during this class that I've never seen in 8 years of running this program. The crowd quieted. Attention sharpened. 4 days ago, a civilian consultant arrived at this facility. Her name is Cassandra Thorne. On paper, she was here to observe and assess training methodology. He paused. In reality, she was something else entirely. Graves looked toward the back of the amphitheater, where Cass stood in the shadows, trying to remain invisible. Miss Thorne, would you join us, please? Cass hesitated,
Public recognition was the opposite of everything she'd built her life around. Shadows, silence, moving without being seen. But Blake was looking at her. Owen was looking at her. All 11 survivors were looking at her with expressions that said, "Please." She walked forward through the crowd, past the families, up to the podium where Graves waited. The applause followed her like a wave. Graves stepped aside. Cass stood at the podium looking out at the faces, the families who'd worried, the candidates who'd suffered, the officers who'd doubted. "I'm not good at speeches. I'm better at doing than talking. But there's something I want to say to this class, something I want you to remember long after tonight is over." She found Blake's eyes, then Owen's, then each of the others in turn.
You didn't succeed because of me. You succeeded because you chose to. When everything was falling apart, when your bodies were breaking down and your minds were lying to you about what you could handle, you chose to keep going. That choice is the only thing that separates the people who make it from the people who don't. She paused, gathered herself. Someone taught me that lesson a long time ago. She paid for it with her life, and she asked me to pass it on. So here it is. She pulled out the compass, held it up so everyone could see. This compass belonged to my mentor, Commander Victoria Reeves. She died in Raqqa, Syria, 5 years ago. Died holding a defensive position so I could complete the mission. Her last words to me were, "Get home. That's an order. And when you do, teach them what I taught you." Her voice was thick now, but steady. For 5 years, I've been trying to keep that promise. 17 facilities, always in the shadows, always teaching, always passing on what she died to give me. She looked at the compass in her hand, turned it over. This inscription says, "Home is not a place. Home is who you are when everything else is gone." She looked up. You 11 proved who you are. You proved it in the mountains, when everything was gone except your team and your will. That's who you really are. Remember that. Carry it with you. Pass it on when your turn comes. She stepped back from the podium. The applause that followed was different from before. Deeper. More meaningful. The kind of applause that recognizes truth when it hears it. Graves returned to the podium, called each candidate forward, one by one, handed them their certificates, shook their hands. When Blake's turn came, he paused after accepting his certificate. "Ma'am, I'll never forget what you taught us. I'll pass it on. I promise." "I know you will. That's why I showed you." Owen came next. "Thank you for showing me what I needed to become. My Rangers would still be alive if I'd known then what you taught me now." Then honor them by making sure no one else makes your mistakes. 11 survivors, 11 new warriors, 11 carriers of knowledge that would ripple outward through their careers, their teams, their students, legacy spreading like circles on water. After the ceremony, the families swarmed the graduates. Hugs, tears, photographs. The particular chaos of joy that follows survived ordeal. Cass slipped away. She'd done what she came to do. Time to disappear again. Time to find the next place where her knowledge could make a difference. She was almost to her truck when a voice stopped her. "Operator Thorne, wait." She turned. Admiral Holloway walked toward her, slow, measured. The walk of someone who had all the time in the world because time bent itself around his authority. "Sir." I've been thinking about your situation, about the past 5 years, about the way you've been teaching in shadows. He stopped a few feet from her. I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. Stop hiding. Come work for me officially. Civilian instructor position. Full benefits. Proper salary. Recognition for what you do. He paused. You'd be assigned to DevGru training programs, teaching the most elite operators in the world, making sure the knowledge Commander Reeves gave you spreads as far as possible. Cass looked at him, at the offer being made, at the chance to step out of the shadows permanently. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. The offer stands indefinitely. Holloway extended his hand. Whatever you decide, thank you. For keeping your promise. For honoring Commander Reeves. For making sure her sacrifice meant something. Cass shook his hand. That's all I've ever wanted, sir. To make sure it meant something. Holloway nodded once, walked away. Cass stood in the parking lot, alone, watching the celebration continue without her. She pulled out her phone, looked at the time. 21:30 hours. 5 years ago, she'd walked out of a compound in Raqqa, covered in blood and carrying a promise. 5 years of teaching, 5 years of hiding. 5 years of trying to make 31 deaths mean something. And now Admiral Holloway was offering her a chance to stop hiding, to teach openly, to build something permanent instead of always moving. She looked up at the stars, the same stars she'd navigated by in Syria, the same stars that had witnessed her worst moment and her gradual healing. What do you think, Commander? She whispered to the night. Is it time to stop running? The stars didn't answer. They never did. But somewhere in her chest, the compass seemed to pulse with warmth, pointing north, pointing home, pointing toward whatever came next. Epilogue. 6 months later, Afghanistan. Forward operating base, 0300 hours local time. Lieutenant Blake Sullivan crouched behind a mud wall, rounds cracking overhead, his squad pinned down in what should have been a routine patrol turned nightmare ambush. He had two options: break contact and retreat, standard doctrine, or do something the enemy wouldn't expect. He thought about a woman who taught him that predictable got you killed. Anderson, Martinez, suppressing fire on my mark. His voice was calm, the voice of someone who'd learned to think when everyone else was panicking. Everyone else prepare to flank left through the compound. We're not running, we're attacking through. Sir, that's... The quiet ones survive, Anderson. Trust me. They executed the maneuver flawlessly, caught the Taliban fighters by surprise, broke the ambush. 0 friendly casualties. After action, his squad sergeant approached. Where'd you learn that, LT? That's not academy tactics. Blake pulled out a worn notebook from his chest rig. Pages filled with observations, techniques, lessons learned from a woman in California who'd survived 18 hours in Raqqa. From someone who learned it the hard way, so I wouldn't have to. He opened to a fresh page, started writing, documenting what worked, what didn't, building his own repository of knowledge, passing it on, just like he'd promised. Dam Neck, Virginia, present day. Cassandra Thorne stood before a new class of DevGru operators, 30 of the most elite warriors on the planet, all of them watching her with the particular intensity of people who recognized competence when they saw it. She'd taken Admiral Holloway's offer, stopped hiding, started teaching openly. My name is Cassandra Thorne. Before we begin, I want to show you something. She rolled up her sleeve, showed them the serpent coiled around the blade. This mark means I survived something that killed most who attempted it. It means I've been where you're going. It means I know what it costs. She wrote on the whiteboard behind her, think, adapt, survive. The quiet ones survive. That's the first lesson. Everything else builds from there. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Blake Sullivan. Ma'am, just saved my squad using Raqqa tactics. 0 casualties. Teaching them what you taught me. The chain continues. Cass read it twice, felt something in her chest loosen. Something that had been tight for 5 years. She typed back. Proud of you, Sullivan. Now teach the next generation. That's the mission. She looked at the compass on her desk, ticked it up, felt the weight. Still keeping the promise, Commander. Still passing it on. Still making sure your sacrifice means something. The compass gleamed in the fluorescent light, pointed north. Always north. Always home. And in the reflection of the brass, Cass saw not just her own face, but the faces behind her. Commander Reeves, the 31 others who didn't come home. Blake Sullivan teaching in Afghanistan. Owen Merrick instructing at Coronado. Reynolds at DevGru. All the students across 17 facilities. The chain stretched back through generations and forward into a future she'd never see. All of them connected by knowledge paid for in blood. All of them carrying the torch. She turned back to her class. 30 elite operators waiting to learn. We start now, she said, and what I'm going to teach you might save your life someday, might save your team. Pay attention, take notes, and when your turn comes, pass it on. They leaned forward, pens hit paper, and Cassandra Thorne began to teach. The quiet ones survive, and they pass it on. That was the promise. That was the legacy. That was what it meant to be a warrior who survived when others didn't. You turned the pain into purpose. You turned the loss into lessons. You turned the dead into teachers. And you never, ever let the torch go out. The torch burned on. As long as warriors like Cassandra Thorne drew breath, as long as the chain remained unbroken, as long as someone remembered. Commander Victoria Reeves and 31 others died for knowledge. And the knowledge lived on. In classrooms at Dam Neck, in forward operating bases in Afghanistan, in training facilities around the world, in 11 graduates of Bud's Class 342, in 17 facilities across 5 years, in every student who learned and passed it forward. The quiet ones survived, and they always would, as long as the torch kept burning. As long as the chain held strong. As long as someone, somewhere, remembered that some lessons are paid for in blood. And those lessons must never be forgotten.